Welcome to the Connected Teamwork podcast by Growth Leaders Network. How do we learn to truly thrive together? How do we stay connected to our authentic selves, each other, and our purpose as a team, especially when challenged? How do we unlock the deeper levels of group intelligence? Enjoy this episode of the Connected Teamwork podcast and learn practical tools to evolve the connectedness of your team to its next level.
Well, welcome to the Connected Teamwork podcast, episode 27. I'm your host, Hilke Farber, and I'm here today to commemorate with you Martin Luther King Day and also to think about this topic of how do we connect with others that are different from us? How do we connect with others that are different from us? I've been reflecting on this for the last day or so, and that really came up to me as I thought about Martin Luther King Day. Like, what is it like to connect with others? That to me is part of the core of what I've been learning about Martin Luther King Day. When I think about my own life, I'm married to an African American man, and I'll tell you a little bit about that journey because in that journey, I learned so much about what is it like to connect with somebody who is different from me. You know, it all starts, like all of us do, with this sense of innocence. Like, oh, uh, beautiful. There's a sense of draw and pull towards each other. And as I tell you the story about my relationship with my husband and connecting to others who are different from us, I invite you to think about how this corresponds to your story, about how you connect to others that are different from you, and what happens in your journey of connectedness, because I really see it as a journey that plays out in our teams, in our communities, in our families, wherever we are. How do we connect with people who are different from us? And before I tell you more about the story, my story, I just want you to notice that human beings in our current state of evolution in 2024, for the last thousands of years, we've not really been conditioned to connect to others who are different from us in a very caring or compassionate way. You know, what happens when you open the door and somebody shows up in front of your front door, you don't know them? Likely within you, there's initial sort of the sense of distrust and judgment. Like there's not the initial acceptance of trust. There's a sense of, this might be trouble. Isn't that interesting that we as human beings in 2024 are there by and large in on average in terms of our consciousness of how we relate to others that we don't know and that are different from us? So I want you to reflect on your own story of how you connect to others that are different from you. And as I promised, I'm going to tell you a bit about my connection with my now husband. And when we met, just first sparks are there, and there was a sense of immediate recognition, like, oh, we are very similar. We are very similar at a very deep level. And it didn't matter what skin color or social class or national background. I'm from the Netherlands. He is from the US. Didn't matter. And I would venture that many of us have that same innocent kind of resonance with people who are different from us. If we can get there, there's a sense of human connection and sameness that seems to be universal. And then in my relationship with my then boyfriend, now husband, things started to become interesting. Because one of the things I said to him was, I don't see color. And he was like, huh, you don't see color? That's interesting. That's probably one of the least wise things I've ever said to another human being. Because I do see color. I did see color, and how could I not see color? I remember playing board games with my husband's family, and we played Boggle. It's a word game. We have to come up with words looking at a bunch of uh, dice on a board and basically make them into words. And I was losing badly, and I saw that the other people, my in-law family members, were doing really well. And I found myself getting really impatient with myself and with them. And I'm like, why am I getting so impatient? And then I became aware that part of that was because I had this belief of, well, sorry to admit this, but I'm a white person. How could these people be smarter than I am? They're black. And of course, from a rational sense, this makes no sense, but this was in my mind. And if I'm really honest, that's where I was. So we make up these stories about each other. And those stories tend to, especially those reactive stories that go with anxiety and stress, tend to separate us. Because in that moment, this beautiful game went from a beautiful game of connection to a game of competition and judgment and separation. And I felt alone. I felt alone. I I invite you to think about your own stories, like what happens when judgment, which to me is the arch enemy of connection, starts to come in. When we start to have some kind of idea about what the other person is, any idea that takes away from the freshness, the innocence of this moment. We don't see people anymore for what they are. We see them what they think we are. They think but what we think they are, and that can be something very beautiful. Like we can have this kind of Pollyannish or kind of like rose-colored glasses that very quickly can turn into glasses of judgment and of being sort of a tyrant and a critic that we start to put each other down. And the same thing I notice in team dynamics. We can get along really well. Things are going well. And then something happens and suddenly the fingers start pointing towards each other. The blame comes out. And this lovely connection that we had of togetherness gets fractured in an instant. That could say is the bad news. Had I given in that moment during Boggle to my judgment, I would not be sitting here saying I was married and I'm married to this lovely man. I'd be probably telling you that this was another relationship that bites the dust or bit the dust. I noticed this pattern in myself. And it's interesting that I noticed that I was judging them, and very quickly the judging of them started to judge me. Like I started to judge myself. Like, how could I think this? Like, I'm in my 40s and I'm having racist thoughts. This is terrible. I've done so much meditation. I've done so much reading. I love Martin Luther King. I love all that goes with equality, unification. Here I'm having these thoughts during a simple game of Boggle. I'm terrible. And you see the judgment towards outside turn to inside. As I start to point the gun from outside into inside. And notice what happens when we do that. Then we lose the connection with our deeper self, and we start to feel yucky inside of ourselves, and we start to feel shame, and we start to blame ourselves, and we feel even more reactive. And we get into this downward spiral, and nothing good can come out of that. Thankfully, I had enough training, enough tools, enough teachers that told me to recognize judgment. It's really powerful when we can recognize something that gets in our way. Like, oh, I can recognize something in my glasses that is obscuring my clear view. So I could see that I wasn't seeing clearly. And it's not like then my vision restored itself to clarity and love in an instant. Sometimes it does. It didn't in that case. I actually took myself out for a walk. Took myself out of the game and into the field, literally into the field of awareness. I took a look and took a walk and looked at the trees and the sky. And I might have had what the astronauts call this overview effect, this sense of looking at myself as this little human being on planet Earth walking around, still body mind filled with judgments that come out at very inopportune times. And at the same time, this person is trying to be perfect, not working out so well for me or for anybody else. So it's like, if I was looking with the eyes of love towards this planet with me in it, what would I want for this little creature called Hilka? And I sensed what I wanted for him was a sense of acceptance, a sense of okayness, a sense of, you're okay. You're okay. It's okay. You're enough. You can be here. You don't have to be perfect. Yes, you felt these judgments. No wonder you felt these judgments, because you've grown up in a world, many millennia, human evolution, where judgment is part of our survival tactic. We need to be able to judge danger quickly, especially when we're back in the wilds. We can't wait very long to recognize the tiger or something that's going to come to bite our head off. We need to have that discernment. It's just that faculty is still within me, and it hasn't completely evolved to allow me to be in a state of compassion and curiosity at all times. So I was being pulled back. But I could also be aware. I had enough heart, enough wherewithal, but enough space in me to stop. I actually cried when I was walking. It's like, wow, this judgment is so pernicious, and it destroys so much. And I let myself grieve my own judgment. Something in me softened, and I went back home and I rejoined a game of Boggle. And I felt myself happily losing and happily finding the words that I could find on the little board of the dice. And I was part of the community again. And I was actually grateful for the experience. So I invite you to think about your own journey with judgment, because that to me is the main ingredient that keeps us from connecting deeply with others that are different from us. How does judgment play out in your life? And be honest. Don't shame yourself about it. Admit to yourself when you have thoughts that could be called racist or denigrating or hurtful or violent. Just admit them. Because we're all part of the human race. We all have that in our common history. It would be really, really, really surprising if that wasn't roaming around somewhere in your consciousness. It would be really weird, actually. So, welcome to being human. I want to take a short break. And after the break, we're going to continue this exploration of how do we connect with others that are different from us, and see what might become possible when we become more present to what actually is true, so we become less susceptible to the lure and vicissitudes of judgment. See you after the break.
You are listening to the Connected Teamwork podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Do you want to learn more about building the next level of connectedness in your team? Please contact Growth Leaders Network on LinkedIn. And now, back to the show.
I wish I could tell you all's well that ends well. The human mind has this idea of like happy endings. Now we get along forever, great. And for anybody that's married, for anybody that's in a team setting, for anybody that is deeply connected to anybody, it unequivocally will come with some kind of tensions and disagreements. And I meet those. And I'm, at least that's what I think from what I've seen working with other people and looking at my friends and family. And it's definitely true for my own life. So to continue the story of my relationship with my husband, one of the things I noticed that when I leave behind judgment and I open myself to deeply accepting and deeply embracing of who he is, something else starts to happen. Something else starts to happen. And I invite you to explore this for yourself. Because judgment is a very convenient way to shield ourselves. Like right, wrong, good, I feel good. You're good for me, I feel good. You're bad for me, I feel bad, or I keep you out. And then I feel good again. So it's like a very rational situation. But what happens when you let go of criticizing yourself and others? Well, for me, it's this sense of deep acceptance that starts to happen. There's a kind of, for me, first, a sort of rational acceptance, like, oh, yeah, I got to accept this. If I don't accept it, we're going to be in trouble. But then beyond acceptance, something else dawns, and that is this sense of unity and deep care for the other. So when I see my husband do something that irritates me, with judgment, it would be so easy. Like, oh, you're wrong. Done with that. But if I don't do that, if I just feel that irritation, open to it, it opens up to something that can be called maybe compassion, and also maybe a sort of redemptive love, a sense of I'm willing to embrace you and I'm willing to embrace me, and I'm willing to be embraced by the grace of life that way transcends what my little mind can come up with. I'm basically putting down all the walls around me, and I'm letting in this music, this grace of life that seems to want to envelop life, seems to want to envelop us. So judgment to me is a door that when we open it, it just doesn't open the door to danger and difficulty and irritation, but it opens the door to a deep sense of beingness, a deep sense of love, a deep sense of feeling redeemed, a sense of feeling together that I sense we all long for. But our brains, which are still stuck in a few thousand years back of evolution, seem to not have caught up to that completely yet, or very far from it. So instead, we polarize and we fall very, 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 very short of actually stepping through the door of judgment into the embrace of grace. We stop there. We keep building all kinds of polarized factions and right and wrong and orthodoxies and all this stuff that just gets in the way of us actually truly embracing what we are and what is. So how do we live this? If this even appeals to you. If it doesn't appeal to you, that's fine too. I know I'm sharing today something that's quite vulnerable, maybe, and maybe a little unorthodox. But what happens when we open that? Well, I was in a workshop not too long ago with a group where blame and judgment had been the operating culture. And people seemed to think that was the only way to get things done. Things were falling through the cracks. And as happens in the blame culture, people would get angry about that. And then the people that would be yelled at would feel worse about themselves and perform less. And that even more anger ensued. And you get this downward blame spiral, you could say. At the beginning of the meeting, this group had a whole list of issues that had to be resolved. So if you are in a team with lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of issues, it might be interesting to look at to what extent blame and judgment plays a role, because often blame and judgment is a root cause of many problems because people are not performing at their best because they feel suppressed, they feel shamed, they feel small. So what happened in this workshop is we talked about this and we explored going from a blame downward spiral to a journey of compassion, of opening, of just saying, of just agreeing that we're from today forward, we will commit to letting go, not banishing, because we're human beings. We can't just cut out part of ourselves. To letting go of blame and shaming and judging as soon as we notice it. And these words sound so simple, but what was interesting in that moment as we went through that and we all reflected on that, and even we did an exercise where we looked at how many times did you blame and judge somebody in the last 24 hours, whether you said something or whether you thought about it. There was this unified sense of like, we all have this. And when we could acknowledge that, it was also not, we didn't feel bad about it anymore. So we could actually embrace that part of ourselves. And the room became lighter. The conversation started to become easier. And the list of issues shortened very significantly, because no longer were people needing to defend themselves. It was more like we're building a sense of confidence together, that we can work together and we together can get things done. Imagine being on a sailing boat in the middle of the storm and everybody judging each other. You need lots of procedures and processes and computers and technology to keep the thing going, right? Now, if you are a team that's deeply trusting each other, where there's no more judgment and simply a compassionate partnership, which includes having a difficult conversation, doesn't mean being like nicey. You can sense that ship is a lot stronger in withstanding the waves and actually maybe enjoying the waves. Like, we got this. We got this. This is why I think phrases like, yes, we can, have such a mystical pull. Yes, we can. I'm imagining. And one of my favorite songs is Imagine All the People. And one of my favorite speeches is I Have a Dream. Imagine if all the people, all 8 billion of us, would let go of judgment, not discernment. We still need to know when something's hot or something's not working, but making each other wrong and being willing to connect to each other at a much deeper level of unconditional love. Like, I'm wondering what would be possible then. How would we operate? How honest would we be with each other? That's what my thought is for today. I'm actually really grateful that we get to talk about these things in 2024, and that teachers like Martin Luther King opened the door to us reflecting. What are we doing? What are we doing? What are we thinking? Is this thinking that keeps us separate more important than really being there for each other? Is this thinking that keeps us separate, that keeps us judging and blaming and looking for culprits, more important than really being here for each other, together, so that we can support each other? I think that's a contemplation and a choice that we all have. Definitely I have. So if you were to ask me, what's the key to my marriage working? It's that willingness to go from judgment to acceptance, to the sense of deep, redemptive, unconditional love and embrace. And the funny thing is, but even though my mind thinks I'm embracing my husband, as I do that, I actually embrace myself. But not the small ego self, but the bigger self that includes everyone, including you who's listening, that does not know separation. I love Albert Einstein's invitation. He talks about that people live in this delusion of separation, where he says we're living in this separation idea where we think we only need to care for the people closest to us, like our immediate friend and families and our country and all this stuff, right? And he said that's total delusion. Our task as human beings is to open our circles of care and compassion to include everything and everyone in the universe. And that's freedom, and that's what we're here to do. Sounds true to me. Thank you for listening today. This was Connected Teamwork Podcast on Martin Luther King Day. I'm really happy to be here today with you, and look forward to seeing you next week when we're here with a very beautiful guest who is a technology leader, but more importantly, a purposeful, compassionately driven leader who I think practices many of these principles that we talked about today in today's podcast. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time at the Connected Teamwork Podcast. Have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you for listening to the Connected Teamwork Podcast by Growth Leaders Network. Take a moment to reflect on what you learned today that can help build your team. Also, if you like, think about one of your team members and what you appreciate about them. Let them know. Enjoy connecting more deeply to what is great about them. And see you next time at the Connected Teamwork Podcast.